I'm married to a therapist, so I'm all about communication. We've been married for 30 years, and communication is really big in our household.
Being
Personally,
married to a therapist could be a podcast episode in its own.
exactly right. I keep joking that I was her only client for a long time, and now I'm just one of her clients among many.
Yeah.
But it's great because communication is such a simple thing. It's like, oh, that's common sense. So of course, it's important to have good communication. But you'd be amazed by how many organizations that I talk to, CEOs and others, that shy away from it or feel like, well, if I show my vulnerability or if I talk to an employee about a non-work related issue, it's gonna show my weakness or come across as being weak.
What's up, everybody? Armand here, back with another episode. Today's guest, we have Ken Schmitt, who's the CEO and founder of Turning Point Executive Search. Ken has such a great insight on hiring and retaining talent. Turning Point is an executive recruiting firm, and we talk a lot about the current generational differences going on while recruiting. We talk about how founders can improve relationships with their employees and actually retain them. We talk about a little bit in his day, kind of like reactive versus proactive parts of your day. And for fun, Ken is a big movie buff. He owns about 600 DVDs. And this just in, I found out they're still making DVDs. Thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoy this episode of the Play Hard Podcast.
Work hard, play hard. Work hard, play hard. Work hard, play hard. Work hard, play hard.
All right, without further ado, Ken, how's it going? How's your day starting off?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me today. It's been a good day so far. Very productive.
Yeah, I'm glad. And thanks for coming on. Hopefully we keep that productive flow going. This is, for the listener, Ken Schmitt. He's the CEO and founder of Turning Point Executive Search. And I recently found out that his brother-in-law was my AP World History teacher. So random connections out here.
Very small world in San Diego. Sure.
Very small world. Ken, so what exactly is Turning Point Executive Search and how did it come to be?
So we are a recruiting company. It's kind of in basic vernacular. I've been recruiting now for 25 years. I went to college here in San Diego at USD. I grew up in San Diego in Inland and Rancho Bernardo, but started recruiting 25 years ago. And I actually launched my firm, Turning Point Executive Search, 15 years ago, back in 2007, just before the last really big downturn pre-COVID, obviously. But as the name sounds, we do executive search, pretty much mid-level and senior level positions. So salaries of around 120,000 on up from there. Yeah, and we have a pretty broad cross-section of industries. So it's a lot of fun to learn a lot from different types of people, focusing on positions that are, president, CEO, a lot of operations and supply chain positions. And then we also do a lot of recruiting for marketing and sales roles also.
One thing that I really comes to mind and stands out what you're saying is, so you do it by salary range, but that definitely changes, especially because you're in so many different industries, so many different companies. Right. What is it like hunting for, I would say, a CEO or COO versus someone else with the exact same kind of salary range, but in a very different and not as high ranking title? What is kind of like that difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason that we do focus more on salary, that's kind of our kind of delineation is the salary, is because we do so much in the way of sales. And there are a lot of people out there that are not leading a team. They're not running a company. They're in what we call an IC, individual contributor role, but they're making quite a bit of money. They might be making a salary of $250,000, but total compensation is close to $500,000, and they're not leading a team because they are so good at selling very high level enterprise type software or SaaS systems or what have you, technology.
I see that in cybersecurity. It's a really good margin.
AI, data analytics, all of that is very, very high demand right now. And so we go by salary. So it's a good question you ask. It's really focused more on the components of the position, and that dictates how we screen somebody and really how we find people also. So a CEO position, for example, the conversation is around, okay, so what is the run rate, the revenue projections for the organization? What's the corporate backing? Is it bootstrapped? Is it backed by a venture capital firm or private equity? Is it owned by a family, maybe second or third generation, right? What does that look like? What is the equity component as a CEO? Do I get to actually own 2, 3, 5, 10% of the company, or I can actually participate in that revenue growth? For an individual salesperson making $500,000, their whole conversation is around, okay, what am I selling? Who are
What's
the
my
customers?
comp plan?
Yeah, who am I? Yeah, who are the customers selling to? Do the customers even know who we are? Are we starting from scratch, or do we have a brand name? And show me that path, show me that runway to get to $500,000, because I'm already making that right now in my current company. So why should I leave to do the same thing somewhere else?
Interesting. And what are reasons that people do leave? Because that is, I mean, if you are already, because I know a big thing about the sales team is your ramp up. It takes like about a year and a half to actually get to, where you already are, let's say.
Right, exactly.
So what doesn't incentivize them to leave?
Yeah, so we always talk that there's really 5 things that kind of dictate someone's decision to make a change. The difference from candidate to candidate is the order of those 5 things, right? So it's things like compensation, certainly, and with the Great Resignation over the last couple of years, compensation levels have been more front and center than they usually are, because a lot of companies didn't do a very good job of maintaining their employees' compensation levels to match the marketplace. That's number 1. Number 2 is title, right? So I'm a director where I am right now. The VP above me is not going anywhere, and so there's not really much upward mobility where I am. So if I can go somewhere else and be elevated to a VP title, I'm going to consider that as well. Culture is really, really big, and this is good times, bad times, big companies, small companies. It doesn't matter. We have this expression in recruiting that people join companies, but they leave managers.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I've seen that play out time and time again in the last 25 years. So if you're working for a great company, but the person that you work for is just a real jerk, right, then you're going to probably leave that company and go somewhere else and hopefully work for somebody that's going to appreciate and acknowledge you as well. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is benefits. And that's, again, becoming more front and center, especially for the younger millennials and also Gen Z folks out there. Employment is really, benefits is a really important component of your employment. Mental health, all those kind of things are really important also. And then beyond that, it's a matter of, do I really believe in and am I excited about the company that I'm working for, the product or service that they offer. If I'm a scientist by background and I'm working for a biotech or a pharmaceutical company, that's fantastic, right? But maybe I'm working for a consumer packaged goods company and I'm not really that excited or passionate about it, and I want to find some other company that has more mission driven. So those are the 5 things that are always coming into play. Then you've got things like location and travel, commuting, those kind of things. But those are not quite as important these days.
You mentioned so much, and that's really helpful. I would have never expected, there's so much that goes into it, and I totally agree. Just to break a couple things down is, number 1, with the generational thing you mentioned, I actually wrote about this on LinkedIn. I very much agree that, so I'm on the older end of Gen Z, 25. So we're just starting to hit the workforce. Right. And I've been kind of saying, I don't know, I sometimes feel like a crying wolf here, but I'm saying there's an entirely new generation that's coming into the workforce. You can't treat us like millennials. We don't think the same. We don't act the same. I'm almost more millennial just because I grew up with the people I looked up to, and my older cousins and people that I saw, they're millennials. But 97 is the first year of Gen Z. So from me down is going to be a whole new different, I guess, perspective on work and on what they care about being hired. So it's very interesting that it feels as if the workforce has just kind of been all right, we're figuring out these whole millennial things.
Exactly.
We got that down. Right, and then you got a whole new generation coming up.
I have 2 sons, and one is 25, was actually born in July of 97. So same year as you're talking about. Yeah. And he also, depending upon the situation, will identify as a very old, very young millennial. Yeah. Right. Or an older, Gen Z. So it just depends upon the situation. But you're right. And I think, one of the things I didn't mention, which kind of fits into the whole component of culture is diversity. Diversity is very true. It's always been important. It's been a big part of my belief in recruiting for a long time. But your generation diversity is front and center more so than ever before. And so companies that are not embracing that are not even thinking about, well, how diverse is our team, not just at the entry level ranks, but the executive level. Do we have people of color? Do we have women in leadership, roles also? How supportive are we of the indigenous population or LGBTQ population as well? We need that, what I call diversity of thought. And, and kudos to you and your generation and to my oldest son as well, because changes won't happen until people start to ask about it. And as you get into leadership positions, you're going to drive that even further.
The thing that I wrote about actually was the different, like, millennials are known as the job hopping generation, because when they first started entering the market was the recession and the 2008 bust. And that changed their view on loyalty, because they saw people who were loyal their entire life just get fired like on the drop of a hat. So my generation is known as the activist generation, because if you think about it, like, even in the past, 5 to 7 years, like, the amount of, in our formative, like, middle school, high school, college years, the amount of, like, social movements that have gone on is so top of mind that when we are picking companies, we do it based on, like, are they socially active or, like, align with our values? So I totally agree.
Yeah. I'm at the tail end of writing a book right now about being an entrepreneur, and it's called The Practical Optimist. But I have a whole chapter dedicated to diversity and talking about the fact that, like it or not, embrace it or not, it's out there. You've got to talk about it. I mean, look at the example with Disney, for example, and what happened in Florida.
That's a big one.
Out there on education, and the way that their CEO handled it or didn't handle it, the backlash that ensued. Then he went back and actually did, come out against the law. And then, the governor of Florida came out and went against him. So that's going to play out time and time again. Or you've got people like Elon Musk that says, hey, you're in the office 5 days a week. If you're not here 5 days a week, at least 40 hours a week, then I consider you having resigned from Tesla. Right. So, and that's going to impact younger people much more so than the older folks who are kind of more loyal. I'm Gen X, right? We were the smallest generation of the last 4 or 5, but we're also the most entrepreneurial, right? We grew up in the 80s. There were some things that were going on socially, but we were kind of that first latchkey kid group. We had both parents that were working. We were left on our own. So if we don't like what we're seeing in the corporation that we're working for, we're going to say thanks, but no thanks, and go off and probably start our own business, or maybe start a couple of businesses. And so that more kind of entrepreneurial spirit is a big part of my generation as a Gen X.
Yeah, and I totally see it. That's funny you mentioned that. My dad is also Gen X, and he started his company because he was so tired of the corporate world and how he was being treated. And he was like, I'm going to just do this on my own. And they have been, like, very successful over the past 5 years. Like, it's truly been awesome to watch and, like, really fun journey. I was going through college and I was studying. First of all, he started a company while I was in college. That's pretty crazy. Shout out to him. But I was studying entrepreneurship, and it was very interesting to compare what I was learning and what was actually happening to my dad, how very different, like, the book version is than the actual, but also how he was, like, breaking statistics. Like, they should have, by all rights, failed in the first few years, but they're going strong, 50 employees now. So it's really cool to see, Generation X, very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And side note, let me know when that book comes out, because I want to promote it on the show.
Sure.
That sounds awesome. If it's for entrepreneurial, then I'm sure the audience here would really appreciate it and enjoy it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I think, and to your point also about starting a business and just being out there also and being willing to make a change. I wish there's more. I'm glad you had that experience with your dad, your dad's experience versus what you saw in the theoretical classroom, right? But I wish there were more of those kind of partnerships. I'm a volunteer for Junior Achievement, and they do an amazing job with different groups. And I actually volunteer, at the high school that you went to at CCA. And we as mentors come in to the classroom, bring that corporate real world, experience, the good and the bad, right? To complement what they're learning from the textbooks. And so I hope there'll be more of that going forward at high school, but also at college level, because like you said, what you see in the textbook, a theoretical marketing campaign or social media strategy compared to what happens in the real world and how it's actually executed, it can be two, very different experiences.
Yeah, that is and like another thing I learned in business school was there's a lot of fundamentals, and you hear it repeated online and LinkedIn, Twitter, everything, like what the fundamentals are, but it's applying them is so different and so unique in every situation that like that's one thing I really took is you could read someone's story and be like, wow, that is really awesome how that founder managed to go about it. But if I tried to steal that exact playbook, it's not going to work. Different times, different markets, different like world. Like it's just it's very like the fundamentals, but they're applied differently. I think it's really cool that also you volunteer at CCA.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I get a lot out of it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And there's a great book that I read maybe about 10 years ago, 8 years ago called Small Giants. And to your point, right, there are so many folks that try to just emulate the 800-pound gorillas in their industry. Let's all try to do what Facebook did, 15 years ago. Let's all try to do what Oracle did or Microsoft or whatever it is. But to your point, the reality is, that model is not right for everybody. And this book, Small Giants, was the first time I had read a book that really kind of gave permission to small companies to decide to stay small, right? Because the antithesis of that, what you always hear is grow or die. As if you're not growing all the time, then why even bother? Why even be in business, right? But the reality is not every company is going to be a Microsoft. The vast majority, over 2/3 of the jobs in this country, actually closer to 70% of the jobs in this country and GDP as well, comes from small businesses with fewer than 500 employees and well under $1 billion in revenue. And so there's a lot of great business out there that never go public. They're not backed by a venture capital firm, and that's fine. They're doing very well. They're employing 50, 100, 500 people, whatever it is. All of them will like their jobs. And that's great. You don't have to grow or die. You can, set up your own structure, if you will, and your own game plan.
Yeah. And I think what trips up a lot of people is they don't realize the level of weight and responsibility that starts to pile on as that growth happens.
Right.
Not just within the company, but as we're talking socially, like you have this really big machine that's making, billions of dollars. You're going to be seen as you have some sort of responsibility to put that money into use and help other people out, or you're going to have to, like whatever it is, your output, let's say you're like e-commerce or some sort of store that's going to be causing a lot of waste. You're going to have to lower your carbon foot and it just gets bigger and bigger as you grow. So I totally see the option between, some people just want to stay.
Right, exactly. And to your point, also what we talked about before with the different generations, again, the younger millennials and then kind of the quote unquote older Gen Zs are the ones that are driving a lot of that conversation as well, asking about what is your carbon footprint? What are you doing for the environment? Why are you using, all of this, non-recyclable product for your organization?
Are you LEED certified?
Yeah, right. Or are you in the crypto space where it sucks up an enormous amount of energy for all of that, that blockchain and all of that data mining? People don't think about that, but these, Costco-sized server rooms that cost a fortune to keep cool and to keep running, that's a huge, burden on the environment to power up all those.
Very true.
So those are kind of things that I think are coming to the forefront now. More folks are asking about it.
And now you mentioned culture, and I want to talk about a negative aspect of culture that also relates to the salary conversation we were talking about earlier. Yeah. So there is this culture in corporate America where you don't talk about how much money you make. You don't talk about your salary. You don't kind of like exchange, even with coworkers or friends. Like it's almost like icky to do that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
How do you think that was done by companies so that they can kind of keep you down and not like need to bump up your salary as it goes on? Because I have seen in some corporate companies that like they maybe they're not matching like an end of the year boost for inflation, or like even times like now they're still keeping normally salary raises where like the price of buying things is getting higher versus they're just still making the same money. So what thoughts do you have on like the cultures of companies and how that relates to salary?
Yeah, it's a really good discussion. We could talk for 3 hours about that whole topic by itself. But yeah, I think if you take a step back, I think it really comes from a change in the relationship between employers and employees, right? If you think about the current structure out there, and I'm a real fan of doing this kind of research, and I was an econ major, so I love all the numbers. Yeah. But if you look at the history of business, we have largely been living in an environment, in a corporate environment that was based on a manufacturing-centric our country, right, and landscape, where people's work was synonymous with where you actually work, the physical space. And in that space, you were beholden to your employer. People stayed for 20, 30 years. You got literally your gold watch or your gold pen at IBM, and then you rode off into the sunset, right? And so part of that
different times,
kind of unstated, contract was that you don't talk about things that are confidential, like compensation, or like, pushing back on things, or or even sexual harassment things. I mean, so much went on for so many years that people knew about, but everybody felt very unwilling to talk about, until things came up with Harvey Weinstein and everything else came up, also with Richard Ailes Roger Ailes. But anyway, so I think that whole contract between employer and employee has changed. Along with that is the compensation conversation. And now with social media and with the web as well, you've got, websites like Vault or like Glassdoor that are literally dedicated to blowing up that transparency and allowing, employees to say, I'm going to rate my company, and it's 5 stars, it's 1 star, and here's why. And I'm going to also tell you, here's what I'm making. Here's my compensation level. Here's what my peers are making. So that transparency has just gone through the roof. And employers that are trying to either avoid or ignore that or not address it are the ones that really suffer. And then they lose great people because they're not willing to bring their employees up to par where they should be in terms of the marketplace. So now tack on to that the entire dynamic that was created by COVID over the last couple of years, where
remote work,
and people forget that the unemployment rate was 3.5% pre-COVID. We were already in this, what we call our war for talent, was already happening in 2019. Then 2020 hit, and everything got thrown out the window. All the trend lines, were removed, if you will, were negated, and then things went kind of crazy to the negative side. Then last year came, and then the trend lines were also blown up again, but now to the upside. And companies were hiring like crazy, right? And so demand went through the roof. There were a lot fewer people that were in the workforce because of COVID, or folks that had passed away, or caring for aging parents, those kind of things. So that drove prices up, right? And everybody hires, so that drove demand up. And a lot of companies didn't realize coming into 2022 that their current workforce is now 15, 20% below the new market. And they only find out when their top players, leave the company. And so we've seen a huge uptick in the number of counter offers that are being given to candidates, to employees that are leaving the company, and substantial numbers. So usually you'd get a counter offer of around, stay with us, we'll give you a 10% increase. That was typical pre-COVID. Now we're seeing multiple examples of counter offers that are 15, 20, even 40% higher if that employee will stay put and not quit. So it's a lot of different factors working together, but all that has driven the increase in compensation. And then again, that transparency around what my compensation is, and it's being shared everywhere.
It feels like a lot of that transparency has been made possible through anonymity. Like a lot of people, especially in the beginning, didn't want to share who they were. It seems like. So what are some things founders can do to improve relationships with the employer and employee relationships, so that there is no need for that anonymity? If something's wrong, they can just talk about it, and they can be transparent. What are things founders can do for transparency in a company?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I'll put it aside here. I'm married to a therapist, so I'm all about communication. We've been married for 30 years, and communication is really big in our household.
Being married to a therapist could be a podcast episode in its own.
Exactly right. I keep joking that I was her only client for a long time, and now I'm just one of her clients. But it's great because communication is such a simple thing. It's like, oh, that's common sense. So of course, it's important to have good communication. But you'd be amazed by how many organizations that I talk to, CEOs and others, that shy away from it, or feel like, well, if I show my vulnerability, or if I talk to an employee about a non-work related issue, it's gonna show my weakness or come across as being weak. And so a lot of leaders still try to keep that armor of infallibility on time, and that creates a lack of communication. So to your question, the easiest thing and the least expensive thing that any leader can do, CEO or otherwise, to retain their good talent is to talk to them. For example, performance reviews, again, traditionally rooted in manufacturing related organizations, right? Once a year, you get a performance review, you as the employee hate it. Your boss hates to do it. It takes forever. And it's the same question. How did you do this last year? What can change? How can I better support you? Blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, here's your 3.5%, cost of living raise.
Yeah.
So it was very meaningless. Nowadays, the more effective conversation is not a review, but what we call career conversations. And rather than happening once a year, it should be happening, ideally monthly, but that can be tough if you have a big team, but at least quarterly. Having a 15, 20-minute conversation, it's not a review. It's simply the leader saying, hey, how are things going? What are you seeing that we can adjust or change to make your job easier? What's been happening? What are some of the challenges that you've been having? What are your new long-term career goals? Do you see yourself here in the same company 3 years from now, in the same role 2 years from now? Or is your goal to get to X level? Let's figure out how we can help you get to that point. Those career conversations don't take a lot of extra time, but they go a very, very long way. And you're much less likely to lose your A players if they feel connected, if they feel engaged, if they feel heard. And that's where those conversations come into play. So communication is what it's all about, and that will alleviate a good portion of the problems that companies have.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. I was going to ask, can you elaborate on communication? Just because we do hear, especially from a relationship perspective, communication is the number one most important thing you can do. Right. But you really colored on what CEO leaders and founders can do to communicate with their teams. Right. So if they do have, let's say, a much bigger team, would you say it's better to have like the leadership team, the CEO directly talks with them, and then they have monthly meetings with their team, or do you still recommend the CEO? Like, at what point should the CEO stop talking to everybody in the company?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's. I'm sure your father is probably already beginning to experience this. When you get to 50, 100 employees, that's really tough to do.
Yeah, it's nationwide too. It's very interesting, like how the virtual world has allowed for a greater access to talent, but the communication part is, as I'm sure chatting over Teams is not the same as a face-to-face conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, I keep saying that in person is always the best. Phone is the worst, and kind of virtual Zoom is kind of in between. But to your point, there are things that you can do even as your company grows. You can have pod conversations where you take a group of employees maybe at the same level in different departments, for example. So the top 5 or 10 managers or whatever it might be, right? And have that conversation with them about the same thing. Let's talk about what you're looking for. And the more that a leader exhibits open communication and vulnerability, the more likely their employee base is at any level, more likely they are to communicate any concerns and share those kind of conversations also. Have you ever watched the show Undercover Boss on CNN?
Yeah, I used to love that show.
I love that show, right? But it's amazing to see how often these CEOs of a wide variety of companies will go out into the field, right, in costume, right, incognito, to try to get a sense for what's really happening. And they may say they have a quote unquote open line of communication, but until they're out actually in the field with their frontline people, they have no idea what's going on. And so that communication can really enhance that visibility also. So it depends. I mean, if you're running, IBM or Microsoft or Netflix, they can't meet everybody every month, but you can do pods and you can make sure that you empower your lieutenants, so to speak, that are running those smaller groups, to do the same thing. Doesn't need to be the CEO every time, but the directors need to meet with managers. The VPs need to meet with directors, right? Yeah. The C-suite folks need to meet with their VPs. And so it trickles up and down, but that communication has to happen to be effective these days.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Now changing directions a little bit on the conversation, let's talk about your routines and any habits you have. Do you have a sort of daily routine that guides your day?
Yeah, honestly, I wish I did. I think I would be a little bit more sane sometimes. It really varies. I mean, and honestly, I'm joking aside, I really like the variety. One of the reasons that one of the things I love about recruiting is that no 2 days are the same. Sometimes, over the course of a 10-hour day, I'll have 6 different things that I did over 10 hours.
Wow.
And so I like that variety, but it does make it difficult at times to have a routine. As I mentioned, I joked earlier that, I'm a night person, right? And so, I do a lot of work in the evenings from 9 until midnight. I don't go to bed before midnight, no matter what. Early morning is tough for me, but I'll make it happen if I need to. So my routine, I like to get 7 hours of sleep. That's ideal for me. 6 hours I can handle, but not for too many days in a row.
Yeah.
I'm more of a workout in the morning kind of person, or I'll go to the gym in the morning if at all possible, and I'll do that. I try to break up my day so I'm spending some time in more reactive mode, responding to email and my team, those kinds of things. And then I'll switch gears to being more proactive. That might be reaching out to my team to talk about certain things that are coming up, or it might be talking to my marketing team about a new campaign we're going to put out there, or it's reaching out to clients, legacy clients of ours we've had for a long time, those kinds of things. So I try to balance the reactive and the proactive for sure.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, and exercise is really important to me. So I've always worked from home. I started the company 15 years ago. We've been virtual since day one, and there are times where I can't go outside because it's too hot or raining or whatever. So I'll do things. I'll get up and I'll just walk up and down the stairs for 10 minutes. Right? It's just getting a break and getting those juices flowing and getting the endorphins going, and then I can come back and be a little refreshed, and then tackle the next thing in front of me.
I think that's really cool. The splitting up reactive and proactive. It is important to kind of have a clear line in the sand between the two. Mm-hmm. Just because they involve such different types of thinking, like the strategic thinking ahead versus day to day, like being in the weeds and operating in that way. I'm a big fan of the random walks throughout the day. They really help me. I've never tried the stairs thing, but hey, I might have to give it a shot and I set a 10-minute timer and go up and down the stairs.
Exactly. Well, my dog appreciates all the walks too. So it's easy to get a walk in when you say, oh, the dog needs to go out. So I'll walk for 20 minutes, which is great too. And I'm a very visual person too. So part of my day is making sure that I'm completing the tasks that are literally in front of me, written on my notepad or my whiteboard or what have you. So that's very helpful from that perspective. And for me, a big part of it was just acknowledging that some days are going to be more proactive than others. Right? Yeah. If I come into a Monday thinking I'm going to have a very strategic Monday, I'm kidding myself, right? Because Monday is kind of catching up from things that you didn't do over the weekend or that didn't get done the past week, and it takes about half the day to kind of get caught up. At least for me, it does. And so it's not until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday am I really starting to get into those more proactive activities. So I got to make sure that I'm fair to myself to realize that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think, because like I've played around with the idea. I haven't actually tried it yet, but I'm glad you're saying this because so what it is I've thought of like trying to figure out, okay, I try to plan my days and my weeks on what I want to get done. Mm-hmm. So I have thought of having days where I'm like, you know what, Tuesday is going to be my forward thinking day. Like Tuesday is going to be the day where I want to work on like future planning for stuff, like marketing plans for the podcast, let's say, for example. Right. And it just doesn't work that way. Like, I think that's why I haven't done it yet, is because most weeks, not to say that I'm reacting every single day, but every day involves some form of reacting to things that happen. You're not just going to have a day in isolation unless you like shut everything off and leave and do it yourself. You're generally like stuff's going to happen at work, stuff's going to happen at home with friends, family, like things just pop up.
Right. Yeah. And and to your point, and at least for me, this is true, having a priority list, if you will, so that I'm not, I'm not treating, things that are less important as I am things that are really important, right? And so you have to have that priority list and keep it top of mind all the time. So for example, as a recruiter, as you might expect, I get people coming to me, 10, 15 people a day that are candidates that are saying, hey, Ken, I'm gonna kick my job search into high gear. Or, hey, Ken, I just got laid off. Can you help me out? And I don't want to ignore those folks. But the reality is, while they're important to our business, they are not revenue producing activities. Right. I need to talk to a company.
Very true.
A company is going to hire me to then fill the positions, and then I'll go out to those candidates and obviously talk to them about the role. But if I am always responding to the candidate side nonstop, I will use up most of my time in those activities when I have to make sure that I focus on the client side. And so I typically will reserve, kind of a Wednesday or a Friday for those candidate conversations. And I'll say, I'll send a link and say, great, I'm already booked up this week. Here's a link to my calendar. Go ahead and lock in a time for us to talk for 30 minutes, the week of, the 10th or whatever it is. And so those kinds of kind of quasi time blocking, if you will, or prioritizing what's most important to us. I have to do that. Otherwise, I will end up doing things that are great for other people, but not as good for my business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like that you do the time blocking thing for in the future, just so that you're like, okay, these will be the times. Like, this is an important task and it's something that I do need to do, but it's not my number one revenue generating priority. Right. And I think that's a really good separation to have. And just what I've been noticing very recently is listeners will recognize I've been saying a lot lately that one of the best things that I could do and have been doing is the night before just writing out the things I have to do for the next day and then having that to-do list ready. That is hands down one of the best things I can do, because it gives me this sense of, it gives me the ability to say no. It lets me, number one, know what I have to do that day and I'll feel accomplished. I get all this done. Don't always, but I know generally. Yeah. But the saying no, you have to know what you can say no to throughout your days, or not even no, but not right now.
Exactly.
And that, like, it has helped so much for me being able to, if I get an assignment that's not due right away, being able to say, hey, I can do that tomorrow. But right now, like, it'll be on my to-do list. It's definitely written down, but for tomorrow.
Exactly.
And I love that.
That's a great point. And I, and back to the whole point about communication too, it's important for the people that are giving you those tasks, right? If you're working for somebody else, they need to understand your priority list also. And so it's asking them, thanks for asking for this request or whatever, what's the timeline for this? Because for the person that's asking you to do something, their timeline is always now, a sense of urgency. But they need to understand that you might have other things on your plate that might have a higher priority, right? I had somebody once said to me, don't become a check mark on somebody else's to-do list, which is all you're really doing if you're just responding to everybody else's requests without being more proactive. So it's really important to ask them, hey, I have other things going on right now. Is this really urgent or not? I have to ask my team that all the time. They'll say, hey, Ken, can you give us this marketing information or a quote for this article, whatever it is. And I'll say, all right, is this a sense of urgency thing? You need it right now, or when do you need it by? Because everything can't be a number one priority. You have to make a list.
One feedback that I've gotten from my manager is that I could do a better job of sharing what's on my to-do list, because just the nature of my job, I work with people outside of just my area. I work with different, I just get assigned different projects from different areas. And sometimes I don't do the best job of passing along what's on my plate. So my manager doesn't have an accurate read. Then when things are put on, like extra things are added, I feel a little underwater.
Right.
What's something I could do better to communicate with my leaders about that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, again, I keep saying back to communication, but one of the things that comes to mind is on a Friday afternoon, letting the people know that are the folks that are going to be giving you tasks over the next week. Say, hey, by the way, here's my game plan. Here are my priorities for next week. Let me know if I need to change any of these things, or if you expect a new task or a new project to come online that I need to make sure I fit into my schedule. But here's what I'm planning on doing next week. I'd love to hear your feedback. Right. So I mean, A, it'll help you prioritize things. B, it'll, like you said, ensure that they know what you're doing. And C, again, it'll help you build that relationship with those other leaders out there, because now you're having ongoing dialogue which is keeping you engaged with them and vice versa. And they know what you're working on. So I think it could be a good approach to take.
That's sweet. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Sure.
And now, to get to the exciting part, I really want to know. So your hobby. One thing is you're a really big movie buff, and you have over 600 DVDs in your house.
Yes, exactly. I'm very old school. I like physical DVDs.
Ken, I was going to say, why do you still have DVDs? I didn't know they still made DVD players.
They do, actually. I know, it's kind of crazy. Hard to believe it's not everything streaming. I've always collected them. I'm a big movie person. I really enjoy watching the behind the scenes and deleted scenes on DVD
nice.
that you don't usually get to see when you watch streaming. because it's just, I think it's really interesting and exciting to hear about how they did this scene or how this came up, or this dialogue changed for this reason, or what have you. So yeah, I really enjoy movies, and I've alway collected movies. I actually have a box of VHS tapes.
That was my next question.
Yeah, exactly.
You had VHS.
The classics, Godfather, Star Wars, all those on video as well.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, it's in the same place where my cassette tapes are. So again, I'm Gen X, so
yeah. So what kind of I guess what attracts you to movies so much? What makes you like 600's a lot. That's not your average movie watcher. Like I love watching movies, and I'm probably not even close to there. Like what about movies do you love so much?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, I mean, as a kid, again, growing up in the 80s, it was when all the big
those are good time for movies. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the advent, if you will, of the summertime blockbusters with Star Wars and Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Indiana Jones and all those things, right? So going to the movies with in my case, my family, my sister and my parents, was a big deal. We'd go on vacation, and every summer we had something to go see. So that's where it kind of started. And then now as an adult, I really I see so many examples of life playing out in a movie. Right. And seeing different perspectives, and there's so much great content out there these days that it's very cathartic. I mean, there have been a lot of times where my wife will go to bed early, or I just need to unwind. And so I'll go to the movie theater by myself at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday and see something, because it's a great way for me to unwind and disconnect. And also helps to kind of refresh my perspective, if you will, seeing how somebody else portrays a story. So it's just been very, very fascinating, but also very therapeutic for me as well. And it's entertaining. It's just a lot. Yeah.
What is that saying? Life imitates art, or art imitates life. One or the other. It's kind of both, and one and the same.
It is. It's very much the both. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then plus these days, I mean, it's because of streaming content and the web, obviously. It's easier to talk with other people about the content that they're watching. If you're watching, last night was the Emmy Awards, right? And the majority of the winners were from non-traditional broadcasts. They weren't from ABC or CBS, right, or NBC. And so it was all from HBO Max, or it was from Netflix or Amazon Prime, whatever. So there's just so much great content out there. So many more stories are being told through movies or a series. That it's a wonderful time to be a movie buff, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. And I like how you go to movies on your own. That was one thing that I did in the journey for me to know myself and be more cool being on your own. I remember for a while, like it wasn't like I didn't go to the movies on my own for a reason. Like I just never really saw the need.
Right.
And one day there was a movie. It was Avengers Endgame, I believe. I really wanted to watch it. Like I have seen the entire Avengers movie series all the way through, and this was the last one, and no one was really available. And I was like, I don't care. I'm watching this movie. Exactly. Sat there. It was one of the most pleasant experiences. You get your drink, your popcorn, you're just sitting there hanging out at the theater.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think there are, as on a movie, people in the movie business will say the same thing. There are certain movies that are truly meant to be seen on a big screen with that complete, fully immersed experience, right?
That was one of them.
They're about to re-release Avatar in the theaters later this month, right? Avatar is a great example. To see that in the theater, it's wonderful to see it on your 55 or 60-inch TV at your house, sure. But see it in the theater where everything is dark and you've got that huge screen and the great sound system. That's a great example of a movie that should be experienced in the theater, just like Avengers, Endgame, and Infinity Wars. And I'm a huge Marvel fan too, so I love seeing all those. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this Phase 4 that's been happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like it overall. I will say I'm getting a little bit of fatigue. At the end of every Marvel movie, then they of course set up the next one. And I was said to my wife, we went and saw Thor: Love and Thunder, which I loved. But then there's of course the usual end credit scene, right, where it sets up the next one. And I turned to her and I was like, you know what? I would like there to be an actual ending to a movie where it just ends. You're like, I'm okay. It's done. I don't need to think about what's coming next. I just want this movie. It was a great story. You did a good job telling it. Funny, great effects, whatever. But let's just end it. So there's a little bit of that. But that being said, honestly, I love all the Disney Plus stuff and Marvel and Star Wars, all the series. I just love that stuff too. So overall, I'm a fan.
Yeah, to me, it feels like this phase 4 doesn't feel as well mapped out. It doesn't feel as like,
Yeah.
what is the word? I don't know, purposeful. Like
Yeah,
not
sure.
as
Right. It's a little
you,
more disjointed. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of
Yeah.
like they're just trying a whole bunch of different content.
Right.
Whereas before they had a very clear like in the end comes Thanos, and then
Yeah,
they
exactly.
all band together and fight like that kind of thing.
It was. I mean,
Uh,
it's honestly, it's really difficult to find an equivalent follow-on after Infinity Wars and Endgame, in my opinion. Those were just.
yeah,
I could watch those two movies, a gazillion times, and I have, and I just love it every time because they're just,
it was like
they're
12
so
years
well
in the
done.
making. Like
Oh, I know, it's
they
insane.
spaced it.
Yeah,
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 I've seen
yeah,
the entire series twice, like of those movies, like
yeah,
phase
yeah.
1 through 3. So I don't know what it is
Awesome.
about those movies, but big fan.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, and to your question from a little while ago about, what is about movies that I like, equating that to being a business owner and an entrepreneur, but really any, business professional out there thinking about Marvel and what they do and what Kevin Feige has done to think so far in advance and be so strategic and say, I'm going to do Iron Man in, 20 years ago, whatever it was, 15 years ago now. And here we are now, all these years later, and the arc continues to work through every movie. So from a business perspective, you can think, okay, so what's my end game? No pun intended. What's
Yeah.
my goal as a business? Do I want to sell the business? Do I want to go public? Do I want to, have my employees buy me out? Do I want to pass it off to my kids? What is my end game, right? And
Yeah.
that will affect the decisions that you make today based on where you want to be 3, 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ken. One thing that comes to mind is I love the amount of massive bets they placed on themselves early on.
Right.
Because
Right.
Marvel, like if we think about what was going on back in the early 2000s, Marvel was being blown out by DC. Like that was
Right.
just a given. They had
Yeah.
never been in competition so bad to where they had to sell their three top highest the rights to their superheroes. So the big
Right.
famous one we know Spider-Man, but then it was also X-Men and the Fantastic Four.
Right.
So Marvel took a look at who they had and they decided to make Iron Man, who on paper is not the favorite superhero. He's like a
Exactly.
really smart dude with a suit, but everyone's
Lot of
expecting
tech.
like Superman
Yeah.
or Batman or Spider-Man, like people with powers. This guy didn't have a
Yeah.
power, he's just really smart.
Yeah.
And they placed a really big bet on themselves for that, and then on Robert Downey Jr., who at the time had just gotten out of rehab, who was facing a
Right.
lot of
Again.
back,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
facing a lot of backlash,
Yeah.
and it was just the number one, the foresight to the execution afterwards, and the amount of
Yeah.
big
I
bets they
agree.
placed on themselves
Yeah.
really played out so well to where, yeah, part of me while watching it is constantly thinking like, damn, how did they pull this off?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and again, I agree 100%. And again, harkening back to what it's like in business, you have to be willing to take risks, right? You're not going to get very far if you just, go the safe route and maintain status quo. You've got to take some risks out there. And that's what about movies also that I love. You think about wonderful movies like Good Will Hunting, right?
Mhm.
Where it was, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck wrote it. And they went to over 100 different studios before they finally got one to say yes. And Robin Williams, he wasn't always going to be the person for that lead role. So you think about amazing movies that almost never got made because the studios weren't willing to take a risk,
Yeah.
and B, if the content developers weren't so resilient and didn't have that perseverance and weren't willing to hear 99 no's before they finally got a yes, then we never would have seen that on the big screen. It's the same with business, right? If I hadn't have decided to, launch my own company 15 years ago, I wouldn't have the amazing team that I have now with
Correct.
amazing clients and great organizations, the chance to talk to people like you, things that I've learned from my dealings with my clients also. I wouldn't have gotten any of that if I didn't take a chance. Not every risk is going to pay off. You're going to make some mistakes and be some failures along the way, a lot in my case, right? But at the same time, you learn from them, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still taking risks even today, 15 years later.
Yeah. And I think touching back on what you were saying, how there are so many different studios and so many different content creators for these TV shows and movies now, I believe that not to say the risk goes down, but the opportunity, like surface level, like the amount of opportunities available kind of goes up with the increase. Instead of you have to go to like one of the big three networks and it has to go through like who knows who, which producers.
Exactly.
Now you can kind of there are more ways to pitch your idea and have these stories go. And we're seeing it play out pretty well for some of these, especially like HBO, Apple TV, and some of those players.
Yeah. And it's the same with the music industry. My youngest son is a junior in college to become a sound engineer, audio engineer, and sound production is his major. And we talk about this all the time. It used to be, even 8 years ago, 10 years ago, a lot of musicians were found through YouTube, right? Which is incredible.
So Justin Bieber got found.
Right, exactly. Now it's TikTok, right? So again, it's not a traditional, recording label that's finding people, right? They're signing them once they already have a good following, but that following was very organic, and it just happened to blow up because someone has a great voice or a good presence, in front of the camera, whatever it is. So there's a lot more platforms and, to your point, opportunities for artists out there. Whether it's musicians, whether it's actors, whether it's writers, or folks that are painting or whatever they're doing with the NFTs, whatever it might be, digital or otherwise, there's a lot more opportunity. But you also have to cut through the noise, and you've got to get yourself noticed, and that's where marketing is such an important aspect of that too.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Number one, I want this out there on air. We can have this dated. I've been saying the music industry is the next big entertainment industry that's going to have a massive shakeup. It's the record labels have just way too much control and ownership and power on what happens to these artists that independent artists are coming up. And I see that because I think it's really cool what your son's doing, because that's what my brother, he went to college to study sound engineering, audio engineering. Yeah. And now he's a music artist. So he's been actually growing through TikTok and has been talking to some pretty cool people out in LA through this platform. And he has said that he specifically wants to go the solo route. He doesn't really want to go through record labels that much, just because they do take, it's not just what they take money wise, it's the ownership of your IP, of your music, exactly, your songs. That's kind of tough. But
well, look at what Taylor Swift has done. I mean, she has turned the industry on its ear several times. Most recently, just deciding, okay, if I don't have control over my masters, fine, I'm going to re-release these songs. I'm going to change them up a little bit, and now it's a whole new album that actually did better than the first album.
That's such a baller move.
And not everybody can do that. She obviously has the leverage to do it. But as people like her start to do that and support that kind of a move and that kind of independence, that just frees up the folks that are just now starting to come up. It frees them up to do things a different way and not have to go the same old route.
And your experience with music, you've been picking up the banjo lately. How's that going?
Yes, it's behind me here in my office. It's great. It's kind of like a movie for me, right? I pick it up. I spend 30 minutes doing it every so often. Yeah. And I can't read music. I just kind of play by ear or whatever it might be. I've always loved the sound of the banjo. And when I turned 50, my wife got me a banjo for my birthday, and I just love it. So it's a great outlet. It's fun, and again, I think it breaks up the metric-driven activities that I'm involved in every day as a business owner. Looking at numbers and strategy and marketing campaigns and sales, all that kind of stuff. When I sit down with the banjo, even for 15 minutes, it just releases all of that, and I'm just strumming away trying to make a decent sound. And it's very freeing.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly why I play music as well. The banjo is, I'm a big fan of string instruments. I play guitar, ukulele, bass. Bass is my main favorite one. Yeah. Banjo is next on the list. I love that thing. I haven't been the biggest country fan in the world. I'm not against it. It's not my choice when I pick it up. Right. However, I do really like and listen to bluegrass country.
I'm the same way.
Pretty frequently because of the banjo. I think it is a fantastic instrument. I think there's so much that you can do with it. Also the banjolele. I don't know if you ever heard that, but it's a ukulele and a banjo mix. Oh, wow. It's the size of a ukulele, but the shape, the circle shape of a banjo. And it has
I haven't heard of that. Oh, interesting. I'll check it out. Okay.
Banjolele. It's really cool.
Yeah. And I'm also a big fan of Steve Martin as well. And so we've, based on his movies, but also his stand-up, and I've also seen him perform, with his band, and he is a world-class banjo player, phenomenal. And so seeing him, perform in person and knowing how funny of a person he is in general, but also the banjo playing it's very inspirational.
I'm looking up I'm still looking for someone from the early episodes remembers I joked that I need an assistant. I'm still looking for one. So that I can look stuff up on the show. But Steve Martin's band, the song "On the Water." It was Steep Canyon Rangers with Steve Martins.
Yeah, right.
That band, that group with, oh my God, is really good. Yeah, I have.
Incredible.
That's funny you mentioned him because he's a fantastic banjo player. Like
Really
good.
Yeah. And I mean, who would have thought a comedian actor like him who came up the way he did in the 70s is also a world-class banjo player? It just does not seem to go together. That's like Hugh Jackman as, as Wolverine. You're like, how can one person look that great, act so well, be so, so athletic, but also be an incredible singer and an incredible dancer? It's just all in one person. It's not fair.
Yeah, he did a great job in what was that one movie that I liked? It's a great entrepreneurial story. P.T. Barnum, the circus one.
Yeah, the showman, greatest showman.
Yeah, Greatest Showman.
Right.
That P.T. Barnum, if anyone's looking for a story on entrepreneurshall, that man really started a circus through like sheer
literally
grind and hustle.
Yeah. All the stories, whether it's Walt Disney or whether it's, all these, I mean, and even people that, started Blockbuster, which is now gone. But, back in the day, Wayne Huizenga was running Blockbuster Video and then hearing about all the missed opportunities, right? Where you think
to buy Netflix.
Wow. Yeah, right. They could have bought Netflix, right? Or, the digital cameras that came out and Kodak said, oh no, well, that'll never catch on. And so Kodak went out of business, right? So same kind of thing, not seeing those trends when they come up.
Yeah, very true. There's so many other things we could go dive into there. But with that, Ken, thank you very much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and so great to get to know you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and thanks for the great conversation too.
Yeah, we just have a couple closing questions and you actually answered. Yeah, I think you answered 2 of them. But normally I ask guests what kind of music do they listen to? So we talked a little Steve Martin. We can go into that. And the other one is, what are your favorite movies you recommend? So that we had a whole section. So we can chuck that question away. But what music have you been listening to lately?
Yeah, it really depends. Like movies, it depends on my mood. If you looked at I actually have CDs in my car, so that's obviously dating myself. But I have everything from Eminem to Elton John to Billy Joel to bluegrass music to Mumford and Sons and Tame Impala. So I really like everything. I'm not a big fan of heavy metal. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of country, but I love bluegrass as well. So a lot of independent alternative artists are big for me as well.
Mumford and Sons does a great job incorporating the banjo.
Yeah, they do.
I really like, there's this random genre, but I really like bluegrass indie, indie music. That's how I actually found the banjo lately, is because it's pretty interesting. But what kind of books are you reading? Are you a reader?
I am. Yeah, I usually read about 8 to 10 business books every year. Just depends upon my schedule. But I just finished a great book that's actually by Jim Collins and Bill Lazier. It's called Entrepreneur 2.0. And they wrote the original book back in the 80s, and this is actually now the new version of it with the original book plus then their 2022 commentary as well, which has been fantastic. I mentioned the book Small Giants by Bo Burlingham, I think is his name. That's also a great book. Moonshot is wonderful, is a very good book also. And I just pick up books that I find on a regular basis, some that are inspirational. I read a lot of biographies also. I'm reading the autobiography actually by Ron Howard and his brother Clint, about growing up in the movie business, kind of what they've done. So I've got like my music, I have a wide variety of books that I tend to read also. And then I've been spending time writing my own book. So that's been taken a lot of my time over the last 9 months.
Yeah, very true. Very excited for that to come out. Can't wait.
Thank you.
And finally, where can people find you and your company?
Thanks for asking. So as you might expect, we're on the net, obviously at turningpointrecruiting.com. We're very, very active, very big in LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to be a resource and a sounding board there. So that's a big place for us too. And then we have a pretty active YouTube channel where,
nice.
Either interviews that I do like this and we put that on our YouTube channel, or, there are different videos that I shoot every month about trends that I'm seeing on the marketplace. So our YouTube channel is also out there.
Awesome. Well, Thank you very much, Ken, and hope you have a great, productive rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Take care.